Thanks for joining us today. For today's webinar, Dialogue Systems Change to Improve Data Collection and Access. My name is Justin Williams, and I'll be taking us to this webinar today. It's my pleasure to get us started. So turn to our next slide. As we begin this webinar, I'm going to acknowledge that we are meeting on Indigenous lands. For those of us who are settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet, and we thank all of the generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land. This recognition of the contribution and historic importance of Indigenous people must be met clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities. Myself, I'm a settler on the territory colonially known as Kitchener, the traditional territory of the Arawandran, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee people. As we enter a conversation about youth success and educational attainment, I reflect on the roles of education in colonial structures and commit to working towards system and policy changes that address the structural violences with recognition of how these structures continue to impact the outcomes for Indigenous and Black youth. As we introduce ourselves in the chat, I welcome you to provide your personal land acknowledgement. Okay, and then sorry, just as we go to the next slide, I think Liam's going to talk to us about any technical issues. Oh, sorry, he can't talk about it, so I will mention it. If for technical considerations, we've got you covered. You will receive a full recording of the call and the slides, as well as a collection of links and resources. To join the conversation, use the Q&A panel on your Zoom client to submit and vote for questions you'd like us to discuss. And for technical support, you can use the chat panel to ask for technical support throughout the webinar. There's also, just to note, you should see a globe at the bottom of your screen for interpretation. So you should be able to select your language of choice between English and French for today's webinar. Thank you. With that, I'll jump into the slides now. So thank you for taking the time to join us for this conversation. Today's webinar is being hosted by Communities Building Youth Futures, a partnership with the Tamarack Institute and the Government of Canada supports for student learning program. This webinar is a part of an ongoing conversation for Tamarack, the Communities Building Youth Futures team, and partners like Pathways to Education. On April 27th, we started this conversation with two CBYF community leads to discuss how they are gathering data to understand youth success and to measure community factors that contribute to youth success. Today's conversation builds from that and ongoing conversations around data collection and availability, the availability of measuring, data collection and availability. How do we measure youth success and systems change that Tamarack and partners like Pathways are working towards to articulate and to achieve? We know from reports like the recent Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario report on access programs, and from working with communities that timely and relevant data for measuring youth success can be difficult to access for communities. We also know from working with youth as leaders that many of the traditional metrics for success do not tell that complete story of a youth's journey. So communities are asking how they can include rich community data in concert with traditional metrics to tell a more complete story. And that's sort of where we are moving with this conversation, and hopefully that we can build momentum for system level changes on data access, data collection, and metrics for youth success. With that said, I'm thrilled to get to introduce two folks providing leadership in this space and then get to ask them some questions to bring out this conversation further. And then from there, turn to all of you to see what questions you have to move this conversation forward. So first, we are joined by Konrad Glogowski. Konrad is the Director of Research and Evaluation at Pathways to Education Canada. He's a research evaluation and knowledge mobilization professional with research interest in community-based research and adolescent learning and development, with particular focus on career readiness and student-centered programming for marginalized students. Konrad has a PhD in education, adolescent literacy and learning, and I'm going to add to that bio that he's already positively changed some of the ways that I think about youth success from our conversations, and especially around how do we think about how we're surveying youth participants. So I'm really excited to be in this conversation today with Konrad. And then we also have John Marie. John Marie is Tamarack's Consulting Director for Evaluating Impact, and he's deeply convinced that local and collaborative approaches are essential levers in solving complex social issues. John Marie has been involved in community development and social change for over 25 years. He also leads Tamarack's work evaluating the impacts and outcomes for communities building youth futures, and spends a lot of time thinking about how we can shift systems to improve this work. So I'm really excited to have you both with us today, so thank you. I will, from here, jump into our questions so that I get to spend more time hearing from you brilliant folks. So my first question is related to advancing metrics for youth success. And so I'll turn to Jean-Marie first. During our April 27th webinar, and sorry, can we move the slides a bit? I think should be on slide 4. So during our April 27th webinar with CBOF communities and looking at CBOF communities' context for youth success, we can see that communities and youth serving organizations are going beyond traditional metrics to understand success. Can you discuss some of the areas for youth success that you are seeing from working with the communities building youth futures, and how these can be measured to highlight impact, Jean-Marie?
Thanks, Justin. Before answering your question, I really want to say that I'm very glad to share the stage with you, Konrad. I really admire the work that you do at Pathways. A little bit of framing to start. I think that when we think about the topic of advancing metrics for youth success, there are kind of 5 dimensions or questions that we need to keep in mind, especially because we are going to talk about system change too. So the first one is around the why. Why do we want to advance metrics for youth success? Is it because we don't have data? Is it because the data that we have are unreliable or inaccessible or not representative of the complexity of young people's lives? Because existing measures are too focused on certain indicators or not disaggregated enough. So I really invite you to think about why we should advance metric for your success. And you can put your answers on the chat if you want. I think it will be interesting to know your whys. The second dimension, the second question is, of course, the definition of youth success. It seems that everyone agrees with the fact that the graduation rates are not the best way to measure youth success. So what is youth success exactly? What is youth success in the perspective of different stakeholders involved in a project or in a community? Also, the when do we assess this success, especially in the context of post-pandemic right now? Do we have to change the timeline or the time perspective of assessing your success because there are chances or risks that the pathways of youth will be perturbated by what we have lived the last 2 years. And this is a dense conversation that we have with CBOF communities around the definition and the scope of youth success. The third question is the purpose of youth success measurement. So for what? Do we want to improve measurement in order to evaluate the impact of a program, a policy, in order to follow societal or populational trends, in order to bring transparency in the system, to improve equity? So to do what exactly? The fourth dimension is about ownership. I think, especially when we talk about system change, this one is important. Who should measure youth success in the society or in the communities? Who should use and communicate data? Who should own and control the use of data? What's the place of youth themselves in the measurement system and in the data collection system? We all know that youth success measurement is not the preserve of school system, but school system is key in youth success. So the question of the who is important. On the fifth dimension that is important for me is the question of scale, and especially geographic scale. Are we thinking of youth success metrics at program scale, local, community scale, regional, or national? Are there metrics that are relevant to all these scales at the same time, so cross-cutting metrics? What are the challenges in terms of aggregation and disaggregation of data at these different scales? So as you said, Justin, it's a continuous conversation. We can go to the next slide just to present no, the next one, just to present that with CBYF communities, so the 20-ish CBYF communities, at the beginning of the project, we asked communities and we had conversation with communities about what are the main challenges that youth are have to overcome in the communities. And the answers were focused on 6 areas. And these areas are can be understood as the way CBYF communities assess youth success. So communities talked about accessible education, so making education accessible, service navigation and access to support, employment and mentorship, identity and social connections, youth engagement and leadership, holistic health and well-being. So these are the areas that CBYF communities try to measure and to evaluate. In fact, and I will finish with this. In fact, there are a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of literature about that, but a lot of different ways to measure youth success. We can talk about well-being, fulfillment feeling, thriving feeling, skills, connections, autonomy, creativity, civic participation, and so on. And also, and that will be my last point, and it's the case with the CBYF community, measuring youth environment is very important also to proxy youth success. So if you remember on the last webinar on April 6th, we had the example of 2 communities who really demonstrated the importance of measuring youth success also through changes in the community and in the environment. So I'm going to turn to you, Konrad, to continue the answer.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Jean-Marie, for your kind words earlier and for getting us started. Before I begin, I think it's important to acknowledge my context. So my role, as you may have gathered from the bio, is that I'm a researcher. I'm an evaluator. I don't deliver youth programs, and I don't engage with young people directly. And I think that's an important lens through which to see some of what I have to share with you today. So when you look at the slide, what you see here on the left-hand side are excerpts from several interview transcripts. These were interviews that we conducted with Pathways to Education program alumni about the impact of the Pathways program. And these were very recent alumni. So they were halfway through their first year of post-secondary education. So they had finished high school and were already in post-secondary, either college or university, and have already had at that point at least 5-6 months of sort of that post-secondary experience behind them. And the research project was actually designed to help us understand how the program supported them during high school. And so when we looked at these transcripts, we noticed a pattern. The vast majority of the students or Pathways alumni were talking about their college or university experience in a way that seemed to indicate the presence of certain non-cognitive skills or competencies or soft skills or readiness skills. So, you know, what I'm sharing here are just a few passages, just a few quotes that we pulled out from, you know, hundreds of pages of transcripts. But I think you'll agree that they show young people saying what we would ideally want them to say, right? Talking about making good decisions and showing academic persistence and self-regulation and adaptability. And so looking at these transcripts, we realized that we had program graduates displaying competencies that as a program, we had never measured before. We never reported on these competencies before. So we met with several frontline staff, youth work professionals who had spent 3, 4, 5 years preparing these young people for life after high school. And we presented them with these pages of excerpts from these interviews, pages of what we thought was evidence of competency development. We also showed quite a bit of third-party research that sort of connected or emphasized the importance of developing these types of skills. And so when we said to them, well, this is exciting. Our graduates are displaying these critical skills and this sense of readiness. And those of you who have experience working with frontline staff, I'm sure this will resonate with you. They essentially turned to us and said, well, yes, of course. Well, of course, they're demonstrating these skills because they spent 4 or 5 years in the program. We supported them through meaningful relationships. We provided an environment of high expectations and opportunities to contribute and sort of test themselves. So of course, this is what happens. And so I think, I'm delving much deeper here than Jean-Marie, based on these experiences. And this will be a bit of a theme for me today. Talk to frontline staff, talk to youth. So we then spoke with some of the youth, we spoke with the alumni, and they again said, well, yes, I'm not surprised that you found this in the transcript, because I was told, before finishing high school, that I would be in these situations, in college or university, and I was told to expect this. And so I felt kind of prepared. We had talked about this with my youth worker. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, I thought I would share this story because this is how we discovered that there are outcomes in this program that we had been completely ignoring or were completely unaware of for a very long time. Because the focus, Jean-Marie referenced this a few minutes ago, because the focus was on graduation rates and things like credit accumulation and school attendance, the easily verifiable quantitative measures of what we often refer to as youth success, we had completely ignored the fact that there could be other meaningful outcomes. And meanwhile, of course, young people were developing career readiness, soft skills that were never captured. So all of this led to a 5-year period where we ran a number of pilots. We explored the extent to which the program assists young people in developing competencies. And we identified the competencies that you see here on this slide, on the right-hand slide. We didn't look into all 6 of these, but we met with program delivery professionals and we asked, which one of these resonates? Let's look carefully at the ones that you think you are likely to have an impact on. And so because of our focus on traditional metrics, for many years, we missed the opportunity to enrich what we've always done with these new insights. And when we embarked upon this long project of testing and exploring as an area of focus and measurement, we realized that it is absolutely central to the work we do. And it's not something that we can abandon. So the key takeaway here, I think, is the insights, the direction came from program beneficiaries and from frontline staff. And all we needed to do was listen. All we needed to do was pay attention. And I think this is critical because we still think as researchers, as evaluators, as measurement and evaluation professionals, that frontline staff are there to deliver the program. And we are here to measure it. And the truth is we need to work together and we need to learn with and from one another. So how do you advance metrics for youth success? What we've learned is that you listen to and learn with and from frontline staff and youth. And I'll add one more thing. It sounds obvious, and I'm sure many attendees are now thinking, well, Konrad, you didn't say anything we didn't know before. And that's true. But I think the challenge is that we still persist in working in these silos where those who deliver the program, those who actually do the work, are generally not considered worthy of being included in the serious work of measurement and evaluation. So we have these very compartmentalized approaches where, you deliver the program, someone else reports on the program, someone else evaluates the program, and someone else does fundraising for the program. And so, true to our modernist division of labor and specialization, we forget how much we need one another, and we forget that wonderful things happen when we learn with and from one another. So, if we want to advance these metrics, we need to first redefine success, and we need to accept that there are multiple definitions of success. And we need to go to where the work happens, right? And mine the expertise of frontline staff and those who actually participate in the program and benefit from it.
Thank you so much, Konrad. And I think from both of you, I took that piece around the understanding of ownership of the metrics, ownership of the data, and sharing that to understand the who asked the question, how we think about success, to be a broader piece, and learning from those with lived experience, to use some Tamarack language, to the youth that are going through the program, but also the folks who are running the programs themselves. I think that's a really key thing to how we talk about like metrics, and because otherwise we'll miss those pieces. So thank you for that. Going from there, I just wanted to ask a question about improving data collection. And so I'll turn to Konrad first. Beyond youth serving organizations, we hear a lot from communities that data collection can be a challenge. Are there specific challenges that you have recognized with Pathways? What are some of the processes and solutions that you're using to make data collection easier for your programs?
So I'd like to zero in on one aspect of this, but let's look at some of the challenges. I think when it comes to data collection, one of the issues is that we often rely on frontline staff to help with data collection. And the reality is that frontline staff wants to work with youth, not distribute surveys. Measurement and evaluation also, I think this is another challenge. Measurement and evaluation is often removed from the world of program delivery, right? It's something we impose on programs. Because measurement and evaluation, so I guess this would be number 3, because measurement and evaluation generally come from funding requirements, they tend to be based on criteria developed far from the program location and the youth and frontline staff. Another challenge that comes to mind is, young people often see data collection as artificial, right? Not connected to their lives or experience in the program. And the interesting thing I noticed is that we often tell them, when we ask them to fill out surveys, is, we say, oh, this will help us with program improvement. But they really never see how the two are connected, right? We never really explain how their participation in a survey has led to program improvement. And we also often have processes or technology to collect data or support data flows that take a while to learn, or that are just, clunky. So I think those are some of the challenges, and they make data collection difficult. I think they often further alienate program delivery and youth from the work of measurement and evaluation. And I think the solution we should be exploring more frequently is to, again, going back to that story I shared with you before, I think we need to engage staff. We need to engage youth in measurement and evaluation work. Move away from measurement and evaluation as being something that we impose on them, and try scenarios where we work together. And so, we're generally very deductive in our approaches, right? We have a theory or a hypothesis, and then we collect data and analyze data to provide proof that the program is working, or that, things are, or how well it's working. And this is, I think, often because our programs have a theory of change that dictates all of this. And then what we do for our funders is we say, well, we told you this program works this way. Here's our theory of change. And now we will capture the data to support this. And I wonder, what if we switched to inductive approaches where we start with observation? right? Could we move on to the next slide, please? So this is sort of the list. Thank you. And I'll talk about the screenshot in a few minutes. What if we switched to more inductive approaches? What if we started with observation? That's the grounded theory approach, right? So think back to my example with Pathways alumni and competency development work. What if we spent some time in our programs with our program staff and youth and alumni, and we just listened and observed, and then looked for patterns, and then formulated conclusions, right? So this approach is bottom up. It's really about asking, so what's happening here? It's observational. I think I see this, is this true? Is this something worth talking about, paying attention to? So that's grounded theory, where essentially we enter the context with no assumptions of any kind, right? We keep an open mind and we observe. And then we proceed based on what we've observed. And when you do that, I think you have an opportunity to recognize, first of all, you recognize frontline staff as experts, right? You can say, you know what's going on here. This is your place and your expertise. Help me figure this out so that A, I can learn, B, I can understand the value of what is taking place, C, so together we can think about how to measure this, how to capture this, and how to report on what's going on in a way that's reflective of what's going on and true to what's going on and respectful of what's going on. And D, when we do this together, you are going to have insights into your professional practice that will help you reflect on that practice and maybe lead to program improvement, right? And of course, the same approach applies to working with youth, right? You can kind of go through the same process, A, B, C, D. So what's happening when we do that is we've switched from measurement and evaluation being imposed on frontline staff, where they are only, survey technicians handing out surveys to students, to a scenario where we engage them because, well, they know more than we do, right? And I think that's what we have to we need to wrap our head around this as, as professionals involved in this work, but not involved in program delivery. They know more than we do. And it's incredible that it's taking us such a long time and that it's such an arduous and difficult process, but that's how we begin. They know more than you do, so engage them in this process. So then, this next step is you reach out to funders, right? And you say, look, come, learn. Yes, we'll do what we committed to in the agreement, but now look what we're learning, right? And so again, going back to that first example, we're learning about career readiness and we're learning about competency development. So we'd like to have a conversation with you about tweaking what we report on or how we measure it. But look how exciting this is, right? Our frontline professionals are learning too, and here's some evidence of that. And so I think when we do that, we move away from this, Cartesian, Newtonian approach to looking at the world as a carefully compartmentalized reality where everything works according to, predetermined patterns. And we introduce a more holistic approach, right? We move from deduction to induction. And in the process, we validate and recognize and pay tribute to frontline knowledge. And we pay tribute to the youth experience. And so I think we need to start looking at data collection from a different lens, right? As guests in places that we want to understand, right? And brag about to our funders. So we need local guides. And I think when we do that, when we use that approach, data collection becomes a mutually beneficial, valuable and valued process of learning with and from one another. So let me briefly explain that screenshot on the right-hand side. It's page one of, I think, a 2 or 3 page PDF resource that we developed with and frontline staff who participated in one of the competency development pilots that I mentioned earlier. And here's what I mean when I say that they participated. We collaborated on the focus of the research study on competency development. We co-developed the methodology. The entire frontline team provided feedback, and the methodology was, in fact, revised twice based on their expertise. They even tweaked the language in our survey questions based on their knowledge of the youth they were working with and the program. And because of this, because they were so engaged in this process as co-researchers, the response rate was exceptionally high, right? Because there was that sense of ownership. Justin, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, and Jean-Marie, you as well, that idea that, it's not something that we can, sort of swoop in and take and then do things with as we please. This idea of data ownership and knowledge ownership is important. And so that's what this project, I think we were very successful with this project in ensuring that frontline staff really owned it, beginning to end. So the response rate was very high. And at the end of this process, this is what we developed. So we had a lot of insights, a lot of data, also focus groups with frontline staff. And so we thought, wait a minute, we are now sitting on a lot of knowledge on how to support goal setting, an important component of self-regulation, which was one of the competencies that we were looking at. We now are sitting on a lot of knowledge, so why not translate that knowledge into a practical document that can now be shared with people around the world, right? So again, we went from this scenario where frontline staff are generally asked to distribute surveys to a situation where now they are part of learning and part of measuring and reporting, and they can see their expertise reflected in this, in this product, which is, just one of many. And the final product is also something that can be shared with, people around the globe in the Pathways to Education network. So we've produced value because to some extent we dethroned the evaluator, the researcher, as part of this process. We also expanded, definitions of evidence, right? And so it really, took us just making that switch, right, from trying to demonstrate that the theory of change works, from that deductive approach to that inductive approach, using that grounded theory lens, took us on that journey, right? And at the end of that journey, we had new definitions of evidence that we could brag about. We had an opportunity to connect with our funders and educate them on that journey. And at the end of the process, we were able to answer that question: am I producing value for all stakeholders in a way that we could be proud of? So I'll stop there.
I'm going to continue, Konrad. That's so interesting. I would just add about the question of how to improve data access in the CBYF communities. So communities work to solve a complex issue, which is youth development, youth success, and with a collective impact approach. So with the combined energy and the engagement of several local stakeholders, partners, including youth. There are in a very concrete way, there are two main challenges in terms of data, improving that data collection. And it's important to see the two dimensions. The first one is accessing existing data. There are a lot of data in our institutions, in our municipalities, for example, at the school board level and so on. But everyone is working in silos. So what CBYF communities report to us is that sometimes it's very, very difficult to access data. And there are a lot of good not good reason why it's difficult. We will go back on that. Also, one other challenge with existing data is to find data that are disaggregated or localized enough. This is not easy. We had a conversation with one community 3 days ago. What they told us is that it's quite easy to have aggregated data at the school board level. But when it comes to have more precise data at the school level, of course, there are dimensions of confidentiality that are very important, but also political dimensions about, okay, we don't want to put the spotlight in one school or one program specifically. So these are the I would say the political and strategical dimension of accessing to existing data. The other side, and the other challenge, but also it's another opportunity, and Konrad explained it very well. It's how, as a community, we create the data and the measurement process that we need. One of the solutions that can help to resolve the two challenges is the engagement, the collective engagement around data, around measurement, around how we measure together the results and the impact of the collective work. So in order to access existing data and in order to create our own data in the community, the engagement work, mobilization, engagement, participation work is very, very important. And CBYF communities work a lot in engaging different stakeholders in the evaluation dimension. Of course, you talked about that, Konrad, capacity building for frontline staff, yes, for youth, of course, because they are at the core, the center of the question, but also partners, including institutional partners. I have personally observed in my professional life that the best way to involve everyone around data collection in the community is to work on capacity development, competencies, skills around data, around evaluation, but with all the partners, including institutional partners, even if they have already some capacities in terms of data management and so on. So everyone knows exactly how to juggle with the different issues, with the common issue that we have in the community. So and it's the opportunity, as you said, Konrad, to realize that having the control of the data in a community is a way to empower a community, especially the youth in a community. And it's a way to learn, to participate to decision-making processes at the community level, and also to gain power. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to say. Maybe one other point, and I think it's on the next slide. With CBYF, we worked with a great organization, which is Youthful Cities, that help CBYF communities to develop their own set of data, baseline data, on contextual data. And we work with Youthful Cities in order to consult and to work with youth in each community around what are the best metrics that we could follow and that we could work on in a community in order to understand if the community is youth friendly. So I've put an example, and I'm going to put on the chat box the link to the infographics that we did with a Youthful City. Maybe you can see them here. So that's yeah, that's it for the second question, Justin.
Thank you, Jean-Marie. Mindful of time, I will just take myself and not comment. But the next one I think we have is around improving data availability, and kind of goes to what Jean-Marie was just saying. So one of the challenges, as Jean-Marie just highlighted, is the availability of timely and relevant data at that really community or school-based or individual level. And just sort of thinking about recommendations and insights for making data collection easier, who should be involved in data collection and what role should they play. And both of you sort of hit on this, but if there's any additional pieces, I'll turn to Konrad first.
Yes, well, this is, Jean-Marie, you asked a very important question. I don't think there's an answer to that question other than I think we have to work collectively to ensure that there is more access to administrative data on, at the community level, right, at the school level, at the neighborhood level. I would like to share with everyone here, a project that we've been involved with for quite some time, and I think this may be one of the ways to move forward. I'll talk about the screenshots, in a few minutes. So a bit of context first. One of the challenges that we faced several years ago as an organization that focuses on helping young people finish high school and move on to whatever they choose to do after high school was to demonstrate that there is, in fact, a strong level of need for the type of support, the type of program we can provide. Essentially, the challenge is that our graduation rates, high school graduation rates throughout Canada, when we look at them at that, Jean-Marie, as you said, at that kind of municipal level or school board level, the graduation rates are good enough. In some cases, they're quite impressive. So as an organization that's really focused on this work, what we needed to do was demonstrate that when you zoom in to look at individual communities, the graduation rates and levels of socioeconomic disadvantage are high. So where do you get that data in a country that's generally quite happy with itself and generally doing well, and that's generally recognized by OECD, for example, as doing rather well in education, right? So how do you, in this context, find compelling data that shows yes, however, there are communities where the reality is in terms of educational disadvantage, socioeconomic disadvantage, are quite different. So what we did several years ago was a comprehensive scan and realized that there really isn't much out there for us to tap into. And we also learned that, of course, Statistics Canada data sets would be the best option for us. So we were very fortunate to be able to secure funding to build I think a fairly sophisticated data visualization tool based on Statistics Canada data sets. We purchased data sets, and at the end of the project, we were able to visually and in a tangible way show to a variety of stakeholders that while middle-class youth may not need many supports as they progress through high school, those who live in low-income contexts do. And we had the data to prove it. Now, here's the problem. We had to develop that ourselves. And as I said, we were quite fortunate to be able to secure the funding to do it because this was not an inexpensive endeavor. Now, in other places around the world, as a nonprofit organization wouldn't need to do this, right? The data would be available for them through government channels, think tanks, research hubs, and so on. It's more challenging for us here. So what you see on the screenshot, on the slide here, are two screenshots from a business intelligence and data visualization tool that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. We use Tableau. This is just one of hundreds of examples that I could provide of how we are using the Statistics Canada data sets to understand the communities where the program is active currently. So it gives us insights into levels of socioeconomic disadvantage, numbers of NEET youth, unemployment rates, and so on. We did a lot of work to pull this into one place, into one hub. But now we can provide insights into why our work is critical in some communities. So just to give you, I don't think the screenshots are clear enough for you to read. So I'll just quickly say that the top one focuses on Winnipeg and gives you a number of statistics that are obviously very relevant to the work that we do. So we can zoom in and look at an individual, look at individual census tracts, look at individual neighborhoods, and for example, look at the percentage of NEET youth, both between the ages of 16 and 19 and those who are older, 20 to 24. We can look at unemployment. Again, the indicator here is 23 to 34. We can also look at educational disadvantage, which Statistics Canada defines as young people between the ages of 20 and 24 with no diploma of any kind, right? So when you're able to zoom in and look at individual census tracts, you can begin to paint a very different picture, right? And move away from data that may not be, well, first of all, is not very compelling, but and presents a very different reality, sort of your general middle class reality. You can also begin to demonstrate to funders, to different stakeholders, that there is a tremendous need for this type of work in many communities across the country. Now, of course, this still doesn't give us everything, that we would like. For example, what's our comparison group? Where is that going to come from? So it doesn't solve all of our problems. And I also wanted to share the St. John example because that's something we were able to develop that's very specifically, COVID related, right? So looking at employment loss, total employment loss by sector, using the North American classification system, and also looking at employment loss both for adults and for young people between the ages of 15 and 19 within one, fairly small community. And again, you can begin to paint a picture, right? What will recovery look like for that community and for young people in that community? Now, where am I going with this? So I think everyone agrees that it's important to get access to this type of data and be able to competently analyze and discuss it and share it with others. But I think what we need to co-create is exactly these types of data hubs and make them available to all kinds of programs and organizations, all the like-minded programs and organizations and colleagues that we really need to be working with, right? Because we can't be working in silos alone, doing our individual best to get the data we need. So when we were developing this tool, we connected with several nonprofits and asked for advice, right? Asked for feedback. And in return, we opened this up and said, if you need the data if you need the data for grant proposals or evaluation work, just, it's right there, ready for you to access and use. So I think we need this type of initiative. We need to take the initiative as leaders in this space and work together, support one another. I think if we don't take the lead, these data hubs that meet our needs are not going to magically appear. And it's not hard to start. I think we have a lot of publicly available data, as Jean-Marie mentioned. There are places we can start and we can adapt, and we need allies, to do this work, because we also need to pressure a number of different third parties to make data available. So we need prototypes. Once we have prototypes, we can demonstrate their value to youth well-being, individual programs, to serving youth and communities, and then pressure a variety of different third parties out there to open things up and to work with us.
Awesome, thank you so much. Because I've been awful at keeping us on track, I apologize for that. Jean-Marie, if you don't mind, as you talk about increasing data availability and go through this slide that you mentioned with Town of Kent in the previous example, also sort of segueing it into, and I think Konrad actually just did a great job of doing that too with some of those pieces around systems change. So moving that into what would be the fourth question on systems change, just so that we flow back on track.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we could, before we continue, maybe you can go to the next slide. I could frame a little bit the question of system change. What I would like to say in order to complete what you said, Konrad, what a big advantage of what you just presented and what you said is also for stakeholders, for communities, to be able to work a little bit more in kind of live way, so in real time, so to have data in real time. This is a big challenge, to work with data that are for example StatCan data that are 5 or 7 years obsolete. You see what I mean? I don't know if I am clear. So this is a powerful. There are powerful tools, in fact, to work with more up-to-date data in real time, actually. So this is what I wanted to add. So let's go back to the question of system change. We talked a lot about system change. In fact, during in the last minutes. What is system change, and how can we frame the question of system change? What a framework that we use a lot at Tamarack is the framework from FSG, Water of System Change. And I like their definition about system change. What they say about system change is that it's system change is about advancing equity by shifting the conditions that hold a problem in place. So if we take this definition and if we dive into the conditions that help systems to change, we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the FSG model about that present the 6 conditions of system change. When we talk about policies, we talk about rules, regulation, and priorities. For example, flexibility in terms of confidentiality in order to get data, data governance, collective management of data in a community, for example, data trust, opening the data to being more transparent with the data that exists. So developing an open data approach when you are in an institution, for example, or create a common language. I think that we need to develop our common language and to be more consistent in terms of concept on language, and it's close to what Konrad presented. We talked about practices, so organizational and practitioner activities target to addressing and making progress in the issue that we want to resolve. So, for example, involving youth, it's a practice that has to be developed at different levels of the system. Developing shared indicators, having the reflex to disaggregate data. We talk about resource flows, so how money, people, knowledge, also and information are allocated and distributed in the system. So I talked about capacity building. Developing capacities of stakeholders is a way to improve the resource flows. There are some less explicit changes or conditions like relationships on connections. So the quality of connections on partnerships, the communication occurring between actors. So we can talk about trust. We need trust in order to manage together some data, collaboration, consultation. We talk of course about power dynamics, and we talked about data empowerment, which individuals and organizations all decision-making power, authority, and influence. So participatory approaches are a good way to shift the power and to change the power dynamics in a community or in the society in general. So involving youth in decision-making process in the data collection strategies, for example, and also distinguish what is political, ethical, operational, or technical. Sometimes we think that we don't have access to data because of a political reason, and sometimes it's just a technical reason. We didn't talk to the right department or to the right guy. So being able to shift this power dynamics and to identify what is the issue and what is the power issue that we are working with. And of course, mental models. So we are talking about deeply held beliefs and assumptions that influence action. So for example, and we talk about one mental model today, which is the idea, for example, that graduation rates would be the only way to measure youth success, for example. So in a nutshell, the way we can shift the system I think that governance, data governance, evaluation governance, collaborative governance around data. So it's very interesting, I think, to or maybe we will do another webinar around that. But data trusts, or in French, fiducie de données. So all this approach that help the users of the data. Sorry, I'm mixing English and French. That help data users to control the way data are used. I talked about the common language, which is also a system change that we can work on, capacity building, and of course mental models.
Awesome, thank you. I want to give you a chance to respond, Konrad, and then I'll wrap this up. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. So very quickly, when I think about systems change, I think about where we are now, and I am reminded that as individual stakeholders, as individual programs, organizations, or initiatives, we are actually quite successful at what we do, but we are successful as silos. We work alone, submit our funding proposals, alone, separately, and then sort of hope for the best. We're very successful, but we are successful as silos. And the challenge is that that's not how systems change happens, because structures shape behavior. And the structures that are now in place are essentially placing us in silos, right? And shaping how we go about working towards the outcomes that we actually all have in common and we all care about. And we go about working towards our outcomes individually and alone in the current structure. So if we're going to create systems and institutions that are meaningful, and support all the many different ways of being successful for young people in this world, we need to connect and build relationships. I can't remember who said this, who wrote this, but there's this beautiful statement that I think we need to pay attention to and return to frequently, which is, if you want to change the system, get the system in the room. Because we need deep relationships. And I think, Tamarack, you guys are doing a really good job convening these conversations and starting to build these relationships, and I'm looking forward to more. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you both so much for everything today in the conversation. I think there was one or two questions in the Q&A, but we can follow up with those questions in the follow-up email, because they were a bit more technical. I just wanted to reiterate that power of the conversation around shifting the conversations around metrics, or who owns them, who's defining them, and then improving some of that data collection and getting the right people in the room to have that conversation. As Natalie mentioned in the chat, this is a part of a broader conversation that we are having as partners, and we're looking to partner with other folks around some of these conversations, because you're right, Konrad, it can't be done within silos, and improving that work together, I think, is really important. And we'll be continuing these conversations and aiming towards a panel during our national convening in November, but lots to happen before November. So I want to encourage folks to reach out to us in the CBOF team and Pathways to keep having these conversations. And I know internally and with you, Konrad, we'll be doing that. So that's really exciting. The other thing that I will mention, and we'll follow up and give people more information about it, but I will get in trouble if I don't mention it, is that CBOF is having another really exciting webinar on a slightly different topic, which is youth leading on issues that matter to them. That piece around empowering youth. And seeing youth as powerful agents of change. So it's going to be on climate, poverty, and affordability on July 20th. Like I said, we'll be sending more information in the follow-up to this webinar, but really looking forward to that conversation. And I want to thank everybody who listened today, because I think this is a really important conversation, especially around improving how we talk about what it is for communities and for youth to be successful. So thank you both so much for providing your guidance and excellent knowledge today.